Okay, we need to simplify and write in lowest terms, -5/12 plus 5/8. First thing you need to know is that since it's an addition problem, we have to get a common denominator. Anytime you're adding or subtracting fractions, you have to have a common denominator before you do any adding. So what we mean by a common denominator is these two denominators have to match. The denominator that you pick will be a number that both 12 and 8 will divide into evenly. Sometimes, depending on what your denominators are, it might be easy to pick that number. Other times it's a little more tricky. So I'm going to give you two options for how to get that least common denominator. The first way to find your least common denominator is to take the bigger number, that would be the 12 in our case, and write out the multiples of 12. So we start with 12. 12 times 2 is 24. 12 times 3 is 36. 12 times 4 is 48, and so on. And you keep listing out those multiples until you find a number that 8, the other denominator, will divide into. So 8 won't go into 12, but 8 will divide into 24. That means our least common denominator is 24. That's one way of finding the least common denominator. Let me show you one other. This one seems to work well if your numbers are quite a bit bigger, but we can do it on these small ones to begin with. So you begin by finding the prime factors of both of your denominators. So the prime factors for 12, we can find any two things that multiply to give us 12, like 3 and 4. 3 is prime already, but 4 is not. So we're going to keep going with the 4. That's 2 times 2. Those are both prime. So the prime factors of 12 are the numbers that are at the ends of all those branches. So I'm going to write down here 12 equals 2 times 2 times 3. Okay, then we do the same thing with the 8. Okay, prime factors of 8, or what will multiply to give us 8. 2 times 4. 2 is prime, 4 is not. There's another 2 times 2. Look at the ends of all those branches, and that's the prime factors of 8. 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, for our least common denominator, pick one of the two numbers. It doesn't matter which one. If one of them has more prime factors than the other, I start with that one, but it really doesn't matter. And so for our least common denominator, we'll list out all of the prime factors that 12 has. So 2 and 2 and 3. Now we're going to add to that any new numbers. So for example, for 8, we've got a 2 here, and we've got a 2 here. We don't have to repeat those, but I need a third 2. So we're going to add that to our least common denominator. So our least common denominator is 2 times 2 times 3 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12. And 12 times 2 is 24, which is what we had said before. Okay, so those are two different ways of going about getting your least common denominator. It really doesn't matter how you get it, you just have to find it. So now that we have found it, let's go back to our problem. We're going to take these two fractions and write equivalent fractions that both have denominators of 24. So we have to think about, if this was 12, what would we need to multiply the 12 by to get 24? Well, 12 times 2 gives us 24. Whatever you decide to multiply in the bottom, the denominator, you have to do the same thing on the top for the numerator. So 5 times 2 is 10. And the fraction was negative, it's still negative now. That part doesn't change. Okay, then we do it again for the 8. But we again have to think, what do I need to multiply the 8 by to get the 24 on the bottom? Well, 8 times 3 is 24. So we do the exact same thing on top. 5 times 3 is 15. So that's our new numerator. Now we have two new fractions They're equivalent to the first two, but they have the denominators that are in common. So now we can go ahead and add. The minus sign that's in front here, this negative, we're going to keep that with the negative 10. So think of this as a negative 10. And when we're adding fractions, you only add the numerators. So all we need to worry about is negative 10 plus 15. That equals 5. The denominators, they don't get added. It stays over that common denominator of 24. You always need to check with fractions to make sure your answer is in lowest terms. So we need to think, is there anything that will go into 5 and 24? In this case, there isn't. So 5 over 24 is our answer. Okay, so you see, with adding and subtracting fractions, there's a little bit longer process, but you have to do that in order to get the correct answer.